Hello and welcome to today's event. My name is Jehad Abusalim. I work as the Education and Policy Coordinator at the Palestine Activism Program of the American Friends Service Committee. Today's event, brought to you by Haymarket Books, is a virtual book launch event of the anthology Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire. Light in Gaza is a new book, a wide-ranging anthology of Palestinian writers and artists. The book constitutes a collective effort to organize and center Palestinian voices in the ongoing struggle for liberation. Light in Gaza is a project of the American Friends Service Committee and the product of collaboration between activists, academics, and writers in Palestine, the United States, and Europe. Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire, imagines the future of Gaza beyond the cruelties of occupation and apartheid. It imagines what the future of Gaza could be, while reaffirming the critical role of Gaza in Palestinian identity, history, and liberation. The anthology includes essays and poems by Palestinian authors and writers أسماء أبو مزيد, مصعب أبو توها, شهد أبو سلامة, درغام أبو سليم, سالم القدوة, رفعت العرعير, بسمان الدراوي, يوسف الجمل, إسراء جمال, نور نعيم, and Suhail Taha. In their chapters, essays, and poems, the authors explore the central question: can a better future for Gaza be imagined as part of a broader vision for ending the Nakba, the catastrophe that befell Palestinians in 1948, by ending the Nakba through return, restoration of rights, and achieving justice? They share their analysis and reflections on Gaza's past, present, and future, based on their personal connection to the place and its people, and through their lens as experts who are intimately familiar with the place that shaped their experiences and stories. Some of the authors are in Gaza, and some are in the diaspora, away from home, and others are from other parts of Palestine, but are not allowed to visit Gaza due to Israel's apartheid regime. This book, as a project and the ideas therein, challenge the blockade Israel has imposed on Gaza and represents an example of intellectual defiance and resistance. It shows that ideas, passages, poems, words, and verses cannot be contained and besieged beyond Israel's fences and within Israel's fences and walls. Israel can besiege our bodies, but cannot besiege our minds, spirits, and words. I'm honored to have been part of the teamwork that made this book possible. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow co-editors, Jennifer Bing and Mike Merriman Lotz at the American Friends Service Committee, and the editorial committee that provided us with incredible guidance and support. I'd like to thank Tariq Baqouni, Anne Lish, Sarah Roy, and Steve Tamari. And of course, I'm very grateful to Haymarket Books for publishing the book and making a dream become a reality. To talk about the anthology, the book, the project, the effort, I am delighted to be here with Refat Alareer, joining us from Gaza City in Palestine, and Mosab Abu Toha from Gaza, who's joining us from Syracuse, New York. Refat and Mosab contributed to Light in Gaza. Refat's chapter is titled Gaza Asks, When Shall This Pass? And Mosab's Exporting Oranges and Short Stories, Cultural Struggle in the Gaza Strip. Refat Alareer is a professor of English, teaching world literature, comparative literature, and both fiction and nonfiction creative writing at the Islamic University of Gaza. He is the co-editor of Gaza Unsilenced, published by Just World Books in 2015, and the editor of and contributor to Gaza Writes Back, short stories from young writers in Gaza, published by Just World Books in 2014. And Mosab Abu Toha is a poet, essayist, short story writer, and the founder of the Edward Said Library in Gaza. In 2019 and 2020, he was a visiting poet and a librarian in residence at Harvard University. His published work includes Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear, Poems from Gaza, published by City Lights Book in 2022. Mosab recently got shortlisted for the 2022 Palestine Book Awards. Refat and Mosab, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I will start today's conversation about Light in Gaza by asking our authors to read excerpts from their chapters in the book, and then talk a little bit about their chapters. Tell us about the chapter and its message, and how it relates to the question the anthology explores. Can a better future for Gaza be imagined as part of a broader vision for ending the Nakba through return, restoration of rights, and achieving justice? Refat, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jehad, for having me. Thank you, Haymarket Box. I'm really honored to be today talking about Light from Gaza, writing for Fire. I'll be reading short extracts from the ending of chapter Gaza asks, shall this pass? Then I'll talk a little bit about my experience as Palestinians growing up in Gaza while writing this chapter. The wounds Israel inflicted in the hearts of Palestinians are not irreparable. We have no choice but to recover, stand up again, and continue the struggle. Submitting to the occupation is a betrayal to humanity, to all struggles around the world. At the end of the day, nothing Palestinians or those who support Palestine do will ever please Israel or the Zionist lobby. The Israeli aggression will continue unabated. BDS, armed struggle, peace talks, protests, tweets, social media, poetry, all are terror in Israel's box. Even Archbishop Desmond Tutu was branded a bigot and an anti-Semite. A renowned actor, Emma Watson, was attacked and accused of anti-Semitism for daring to post in support of Palestine solidarity on Instagram. No matter how mild the criticism of Israel's crimes or how slight the support for Palestinian rights, the Zionist lobby will attempt to scorch the earth to prevent that. This is further evidence that Israel is not merely after Palestinian armed struggle, armed resistance, but it is also after the very existence of Palestinians. I know that many Palestinians ask if more can be done, if free people can do more to prevent Israel from continuing to commit horrifying crimes against Palestinians. Can popular resistance or armed struggle or BDS or pro-Palestine groups like Jewish Voice for Peace or Black Lives Matter activists or indigenous struggle activists around the world help to exert pressure and prevent further Israeli aggressions, to bring those Israeli war criminals to justice and to end their impunity? When will this pass? When will it be enough? How many dead Palestinians are enough? How many massacres are enough? I recall in horror and shudder as I write this. I'm exposed, naked, and vulnerable. Sometimes late at night when insomnia hits, I wonder if it is all worth it, if anything will ever change. When I was approached to write for this book, the promise was that it will effect change, that policies, especially in the United States, will be improved. But honestly, will they? Does a single Palestinian life matter? Does it? Gaza is not and should not be the priority only when Israel is shedding Palestinian blood en masse. Gaza as the epitome of the Palestinian Nakba is suffocating and being butchered right in front of our eyes and often live on TV and on social media. It shall pass, I keep hoping. It shall pass, I keep saying. Sometimes I mean it, sometimes I don't. And as Gaza keeps gasping for life, we struggle for it to pass. We have no choice but to fight back and to tell her story for Palestine. Okay, so this is an extract from the final portion of my essay, Gaza asks, when shall this pass? And I remember when I was approached by Jehad write this chapter, I already had started writing with a friend of mine on young Palestinians and how they can take the initiative to lead the struggle, probably replace the aging Palestinian leadership. And during the war in 2021, when Israel started yet another campaign of mowing the lawn, butchering hundreds of Palestinians, destroying, devastating Palestinian homes and infrastructure. Jihad, I published an article on my experience as a father, taking care of my kids, trying to shield them against the pain and the suffering, trying to lie them about what's going on, trying to hide their hearts, their eyes, their minds, as much as a father living in Gaza being exposed to one of the worst Israeli campaigns could ever do. And Jihad was like, can you write something narrative? You like telling stories. And these stories are painful most often, but they are significant. They must be told. They must be heard. And as we chatted along, it clicked. Something clicked inside of me. A series of stories like rosary beads popped, almost physically, very vividly in my mind, and started telling Jihad some of those stories. And Jihad was like, yes, exactly, this is what we want. We need some of these stories in order to reach out to as many Palestinians, non-Palestinians around the world. And if you go through the chapter, it's a long series of stories. I have a very good memory. My friends always complain about that, but this is significant for us Palestinians, remembering. Forgetting is a crime. But sadly, even my earliest memories, I was born in 1979. I think I remember things as far as 1980, 84, 85, when I was 4 years old and 5 years old. And all these memories are stained by, even before the Intifada, I tell the story of one night my father coming back home on his way from occupied Palestine. He was shot at, he was with his friend in his car, and he was shot at, was injured in his shoulder. And it was my first experience hearing my mom shriek in the middle of the night. I woke up, not conscious to what was going on. I went downstairs, and there was my father's car, glass shattered and blood dripping around. It was then when I first heard the words Jews and Israelis and Israel and the occupation, and it haunted me ever since. And as I grew up Palestinian in the first Intifada, I witnessed firsthand Israeli soldiers beating up little kids, like almost sometimes smashing their bones. One of my friends, Liwa, about whom I also wrote in this chapter, was shot in front of our eyes as we went back home. We were finishing the day, going back home, being, the kids we were, and an Israeli settler at that time just got out of his car and shot him from blank. And this was, I think, we were like 11, 12 years old. Seeing this and hearing about this and living with this creates all sorts of traumas that can never be fixed. And when I started writing Liwa's story, I called a friend of ours, Liwa's cousin, to ask about the exact date and how old was Liwa when he was shot dead. And coincidentally, he happened to be at Gaza's Shifa hospital. And he told me that he is with Liwa's mother, who had a brain tumor, and she was having difficulty being transferred from Gaza to seek medical treatment in Jerusalem or in the West Bank, because Israel is also delaying this kind of treatment for many Palestinians. And she passed away later on. And the thing is that how everything is connected. Even when you remember your friend, you talk to your friend, there is always, Israel does not just bring one calamity, one crisis, one death, one massacre to each Palestinian family. There is always a series of traumas, a series of massacres, a series of crimes that Israel keeps committing. And we grew up usually literally evading Palestinian, Israeli bullets, being caught by Israeli soldiers and having our bones smashed. I speak about this one particular experience when we were playing soccer outside, and then the Israeli jeeps invaded the neighborhood, Shijaiya neighborhood where I lived, and then we ran away, and all of a sudden the soldiers climbed over the wall, and they were in our home, and they make us stand against the wall, and they started checking our hands to see if they are dirty, a sign that we were throwing stones, and checking our hearts to see if our hearts were racing. And of course, like I say, we are kids, our hearts always race, and we are just terrified that there's this kid, Ryan, last week, who dropped dead because he saw the Israeli soldiers breaking into their home, and we had to be beat up, of course, because our hands were dirty, as any 12-year-old or 11 or 10-year-old would be, and our hearts were racing because, of course, we have these giants in front of us holding the huge M16s of the past Intifada, and I speak about these experiences and many others. And in the second Intifada, when Israel grew even more vicious against Palestinians, when Palestinians started being killed like never before. Shijaiya, where I live again, every time Israel invaded, at least 15 or 20 Palestinians would be killed. And many of these happen to be friends, happen to be family members, people we would meet around the corner of the street, we would play together. And when you grow up with all of this trauma, death, the suffering, the disabilities Israel would intentionally bring on Palestinians, with people losing limbs. There's always this question: how would you outlive this and survive this? And I talk about how Palestinians usually have these catchphrases, sound bites, like all other cultures, that it shall pass, betun, bitaddi, this shall pass, this shall pass, this shall pass. Every time there is a calamity, there is a crisis, there is a massacre, we would hear people being steadfast, being determined, people who realize that they have done nothing wrong. The only crime they have committed is that they are Palestinians, is that they are living on a land that is being occupied and by an army, an Israeli brutal army supported by the West. Never once do I remember Palestinians saying, I think this is it, we need to give up, need to leave and let those criminals have a free hand at what we own, the trees we plant, the houses we build. I know of many Palestinians, and many, I think, know this, Palestinians having to plant their lands like more than 10 times, to build their houses twice, 3 times, and 4 times, insisting on continuing, on rejecting Israeli rules. And then after the second Intifada, when I started teaching, lecturing at university, I later on with Israel starting these huge military campaigns in 2008 and 9, 2012, 2014. Every couple of years, Israel taking a decision to start mowing the lawns, to put Palestinians in their place, killing. And for Israelis, this could be just, a lawn. Scorched earth policy, but for Palestinians, it means the deaths of thousands, the destruction of hundreds of thousands of housing units. I speak about how I try to make sense, how to educate my students and the people around me using stories, insisting on telling stories. I speak about my experience compiling some of these stories into Gaza Writes Back and helping the students and my friends around to express themselves in the most beautiful, most creative way possible. And I'm very proud to see, even now as I'm talking, one of my students is contacting me saying that she published one of her stories on device. And so this is partly what this book is about. It's about writing, speaking to people, reaching out, gasping for breath, telling people we deserve life, Palestinian lives matter, that Palestinian struggle is part of the global struggle against injustice, against oppression, against racism, against white supremacy, against imperialism, that we are partners in this struggle, and that Palestinians will never, ever give up, because if we give up today, many will say, look, Palestinians gave up, and I think you too need to give up. That will never, ever happen.
Thank you so much, Refaat, for reading this powerful excerpt from your chapter, and for telling us about your chapter, and for sharing parts of your personal story, your personal journey as a Palestinian, growing up and living in the Gaza Strip, a son, a father, an educator, whose journey, in addition to 2 other million journeys, each one of them is a story on its own, and each story sums up through the experience of a single individual how the continuation of oppression, of occupation, of apartheid, of settler colonialism continues to impact people's lives. We are Gaza is a small place. Its area is around 140 square miles. People know each other. People, live in this densely populated area, and sometimes when you live there, when you grow up there, you rarely reflect on your own journey. But it's very important for us to understand the Palestinian experience in Gaza through the story of one person. And I'm personally grateful, because you have taught me and taught hundreds of students in Gaza how to write their stories, how to express themselves with confidence, with strength, and I think when someone who teaches people how to tell their stories tells their story, it's also very powerful. And before I move to Mosab and to hear his excerpt from the book and his reflections on his piece, on his chapter, I would like to remind our audience that if you have any questions for our guests or for me about the book or about their chapters or about Gaza, please feel free to write your questions in the YouTube live chat, and our colleagues here will make sure to keep your questions for us to answer in the Q&A segment of today's event. Mosab, I would like for you to read an excerpt of your chapter, and then share with us why you wrote this chapter, what's the message in it, and how does it connect to the broader theme of the book, how a vision for Gaza's liberation as part of broader Palestinian liberation. Mosab, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jehad. Thank you to a big thank you goes to Haymarket Books for bringing this book out to the world. And I mean, no matter how young or how old one is, I share this fact with my colleague Refaat about how ugly a fact it is to realize that you are living under occupation, living under siege at a later age. So no one ever told us that we are living under occupation until we saw the atrocities in our own eyes. So personally, I never learned that I was born in an occupied country until I saw a helicopter shooting a rocket into a residential building in Al-Nasser. That was in 2000. So my chapter is titled Exporting Oranges and Short Stories, the Cultural Struggle in the Gaza Strip. And I'm going to read from my chapter. It's on page 179. In March 2021, many of my students expressed how proud they were of Lu'ay al-Basyouni, a young man from Beit Hanun in the north of the Gaza Strip, who was on the team that created the NASA rover Perseverance that had just landed on Mars. I told my students that every one of them can fly from Gaza to Mars, no matter how many bombs Israel throws on their schools and libraries, no matter how many fingers break under the rubble. I seized the chance and asked them, what do you want to become in the future? They answered, a farmer, a doctor, a horseman, a salesman, a footballer, a vendor. I then asked, no one wants to be an actor, a pilot, but we do not have a theater or an airport. A couple of them replied in unison. You can dream, there is one, and it will come true, I told them. Okay, so there is an airport, a cinema, a theater, a library, and a seaport with a big, big sea. One student whose voice I had never heard over the previous weeks burst out, I want to be a captain. The wind stopped howling through the classroom. His voice pushed the wind back to the sea, far away. I want to be a fisherman, another student exclaimed, and maybe a diver and make videos in the deep seas, post them on YouTube and get millions of followers on Facebook. I wish I could be a pilot so I can go with my friends to camp somewhere on an island, joined another student in a beanie, not a pilot's hat. Someone asked me, teacher, if you wanted to travel, where would you go? To America or Europe, someone uttered before I could find where the sound came from. That sounds good. For me, I would like to first go to Jaffa and see the big tree in front of my grandfather's house, I said. That's romantic, the boy responded. We all laughed. I would make sure to ask all of you to come with me. I would also invite my overseas friends to join us for a cup of coffee in Jaffa's seashore, I continued. And maybe ask writer friends of yours to discuss their latest books. Maybe we can rent a hall in a hotel. Why don't we invite them to Gaza? Wouldn't we have an airport, as you have said? The bell rang and the children left, but the threads of our thoughts continue to grow until this day. We still speak about our dreams during recess and even after classes end. When we hear the Israeli drones in the sky, we convince ourselves that they are videotaping us while we are playing a match with the winner of the European Champions League, or dancing Debka as part of a cultural festival in our newly built theater overlooking the harbor. So this part comes at the end of my chapter, which is again titled "Exporting Oranges and Book and Short Stories: The Cultural Struggle in Gaza." So I wrote this chapter especially because of my experience as a founder of the Edward Said Public Library. As a child, I've never entered a public library because there was no one in the refugee camp where I was born. So it happened that in 2014, the Israeli warplanes bombed the Islamic University of Gaza, where Refat teaches. So during a ceasefire, I happened to go there to check on the department because I was still a student. I was about to graduate in 2014. So I went to the department, and the one scene that shocked me was books under the rubble. And one of the books with which I took a photo of myself was the Norton Anthology of American Literature, which I later learned that it was Rifat's book. I mean, this is to admit that I haven't taken the book home. I just returned it, so I don't own it now. So that book, it was something like a spark. It was an invitation for me to start collecting books, to find a place where books are in a safe place, not in a terrorist place like Israel is calling the Islamic University of Gaza. It was a lab, they said, to make explosive things. But yeah, books are explosive devices. They teach us how to think. So in my chapter, I talk about how Gaza is struggling with culture, not only because of the economic situation, but mainly because of the Israeli occupation, the Israeli siege. So not only have Palestinians been expelled from their homes and ancestral land, not only have they been thrown into prisons, not only have their trees been cut and burned, not only have they been subject to daily killing and humiliation, not only have they been denied the right to return to their homes, but they are also denied access to knowledge and literature, besieged and even inside their homes during curfews and random airstrikes. They are not allowed to travel freely, even through books. If one doesn't get killed by Israel, then life must be made unbearable. And I'm talking about Israel siege, where we cannot get books easily as we wish. For example, the book that we are talking about, to which I contributed, is Light in Gaza. And I'm lucky because I'm now currently in the United States pursuing my education. So I got the book within a week or 10 days. If I were in Gaza at the moment, I wouldn't still smell that the book is in Palestine, because the book usually just lands in Israel, in Tel Aviv, let's say, and then it spends maybe 5-6 weeks in prison there until they release it and until you can just lay your eyes on it. There are many examples that I'm talking about in this chapter. For example, I talk about cinemas in Gaza, how Gaza used to have many cinemas, like Cinema Al-Nasr, Cinema Amir, and how these cinemas were closed because of some, partly because of the blockade, partly because of the some thinkings, some different types of thinking of people. I'm talking about how people perceive cinema in Gaza. This is a cultural issue. I'm talking about Israel bombing cultural centers, and one striking example is the Said al-Mishal Cultural Center, which Israel bombed in 2018. But even though Israel bombed that center, even after the building was destroyed by the Israeli airstrike, the actors and artists of a group called the Ishtar Theater kept the show going in the ruins. So they kept performing their plays, their acts, even on the rubble, above the rubble of that bombed building. Another example that I'm talking about in the book is in 2000, just at the beginning of the second Intifada, I was 8 years old. I used to go to a huge building that had many shops and cafes near our house. I stood at the doors of the cafes to look at football matches from Spanish La Liga, Italian Serie A, and English Premier League. That was the Italian complex building. However, on August 26, 2014, Israel bombed and destroyed that building. However, the derelict tower, once a residential and commercial complex, was given a new life by Ali Al-Jabali, a 26-year-old graphic artist from Gaza, who turned the destroyed building into an art gallery. And there is also the TEDx Shuja'iyya, which Refat was part of. So in October 2015, 1 year after the 2014 war, a group of young people worked to launch a unique version of the well-known American program TEDx, live from the battered Gaza Strip. The festival took place in a Shuja'iyya neighborhood, where Israel had launched a massacre that leveled most of the houses and killed about 74 people. The festival's organizers wanted to show the world that Palestinians, and especially those from Gaza who suffered severely from wars and neglect, have stories worth telling and ideas worth spreading. The event consisted of 12 speakers who presented in English and Arabic. They spoke to an audience of over 100 people about struggle, determination, and success in the Gaza Strip. So the book is talking about, the chapter is talking about how Palestinians are suffering and how they are trying to overcome these hardships.
Thank you so much, Mosab, for this great, introduction, which I think it's going. Your contribution in the chapter is very important in terms of introducing the reader to the cultural scene in Gaza, providing some sort of a historical perspective, giving a context, but also, showing how complex and rich and vibrant the cultural scene in Gaza is, and that it's, that there are challenges from within and from without, and at the end of the day, we deal with a multi-layered system of oppression, right? So there are challenges that we face within our society that cannot be seen, cannot be understood without looking at the broader picture, at the bigger picture of how there are layers and layers of oppression that Palestinians deal with on a daily basis. And when it comes to the cultural scene, when it comes to the challenges that face artists, people who thinkers, intellectuals, academics, writers, they grapple with many of these layers of oppression, the physical barriers Israel imposes, the social challenges, and so on and so forth. And all of these issues are linked at the end. I recall the brief moment, when Gaza in the late 90s was, slightly more open to the outside world. I remember the book exhibitions. I remember, foreigners visiting, and artists from Gaza being able to travel and go elsewhere. And those brief moments of relative freedom, freedom of movement and access show us what could happen if the blockade is lifted. What could happen if things change on the ground. And because you spoke about culture and about the role of culture, the role of artists, the role of writers, and because your area of focus overlaps with that of Refat's, I would like to go back to Refat to ask him to reflect a little bit about storytelling as an act of resistance, especially from the standpoint of your students, right? You work with students as an educator. You help them write in a language that is their second language, when English, and you also, like, you're not just giving them education, you're also empowering them, giving them skills, giving them the capacity to tell their stories, to understand themselves better, to communicate with the outside world. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience as someone who helps people tell their stories and help people reflect on their experiences through writing? And what can we learn from your experience as someone who does these things in a place like Gaza, especially when it comes to working with young people? So the floor is yours, and we would really appreciate it if you could speak up a little bit so that we can hear you better.
Okay, thank you, Jehad. Thank you, Mosab. When I finished my BA in 2001, I fell on a treasure. I encountered a treasure. Somebody brought a container, a huge container of books to the Islamic University, and I would go and keep digging books. And there was this very strange book called Malcolm X, cover back and read and heard of Malcolm X before. I was 20 at that time. And I was holding the book, and a friend of mine, Mahmoud, said, "Wow, you found this book." I said, "I found it, but I don't know what X is." And he said, "You have to read this book." It was a life-changing experience in so many ways, how a man could be imprisoned, like not physically later on, spending years in prison, but being imprisoned in this society community that discriminates against him just because he's black, how he does his best to integrate early in his life, how he becomes a gangster, how he loses his family members, loses every opportunity to become somebody he wanted. There's this story when he was a child, telling his teacher that I want to be a lawyer, and the teacher saying, "No, I think you should be a carpenter," or something like this. And then in prison, there was this thing, the life-changing experience was, in addition to being introduced to Islam, was Malcolm X introduced to reading, to books, finding a way out, finding himself, learning new words, new expressions, reading about the history of black people and slavery and injustices and discrimination. And I started paying more and more attention to writing. I really wanted to write something, anything at that time, but I never found the guide, the support. I never found the training, anybody to tell me what. So I tried to do it myself by reading as much as possible, imitating. The first thing I ever wrote was imitating Jonathan Swift's modest proposal. I just changed a couple of lines to make it, instead of about the Irish people under British imperialism, make it about Palestine, really, occupation. And again, thanks to many websites like the Electronic Munduwise, they encouraged us to write. They published the pieces we wrote, despite the fact that they were at the beginning not that good in a sense, but they wanted to hear to Palestinians, listen to Palestinians, especially the young people. 2008 and 9, when Israel waged Operation Castlet, I spent, well, between the two terms, I spent the time preparing for the semester to come. When I look back, it was really cheesy a little bit, people dying, but I had nothing to do. I would spend the time telling my kids stories and also preparing for the semester to come, despite the Israeli promise that Palestinians will come out and will not recognize there will be destruction everywhere. But I insisted on reading, finding purpose in. And when I told many stories to my kids, when the stories would run out, I would try to make up new stories. And I remember stories told to me by my mother, by my grandmother. This thing clicked, like how a story could be told and retold by the grandmother, by the mother, by the father, or the kids, and the kids being distracted for a tiny little bit of moment from the rockets and the missiles, the destruction, the smell of gunpowder around us. I took a decision to go back to my classes and ask students to write stories, to write fiction or non-fiction. Just tell your story, or tell the stories of people. You have the agency, you have the voice, you have the power of language. And of course, there was a protest. There was a flaw. Like, we've never written anything, let alone write fiction. We can try to write research or an article or an academic essay. And my answer was, I am here for that. I have some skills myself. I will use all the skills I can, all the resources I have in order to make this, to teach you, to show you, to guide you. And one of the stories that I started Gaza Writes Back with was by one of my students, who's now a colleague of mine at university, Hanan Habashi. She came to me almost trembling, saying, I have never written stories before. I said, let's try. You're here, you're at university to learn. Let's take this opportunity, and I'm sure you'll write something else. And her story was fascinating, impressive in all aspects. And that seeing, like you said, Jehad, seeing these people find purpose in story, find hope, The student I just told you about, she's a physician. She's training to be a physician. I'm training a group of young Palestinians to write academic writing, content writing. And I always say, look, I'm teaching you this because of the jobs you will find online if you want to work as a freelancer, as a researcher, as a content writer. But there's something about us Palestinians that the people around the world want to listen to, our stories and the stories of the people around us. And I told Siwar, you have a very good chance of becoming a really good writer because you're a doctor, you have so many experiences working at Shifa hospital. And the message she just sent me, again, keeps giving me the hope that we need to do this. We need to do this. She said, it's published. Oh my God, I feel proud of myself. I did it. And this thing is significant. This feeling that Israel deprives Palestinians of, the feeling of being able to do things, to just drive for 2 hours to Jerusalem, go eat, grapes in Jalil, enjoy coffee in Al Jalil, go to Jenin, meet somebody, meet new friends. We are in Gaza, we don't have the West Bank and Jerusalem because Israel wouldn't allow this. It's very usually the physical barriers Israel adds. Magnificent. So when I think of steering my students, the people around me towards this, I know how much it means to them, releasing these things inside, and also how significant it is to educate, in addition to educating themselves, like you said, they have educating others, reaching out to the world, connecting Palestine, the Palestinians with the struggle around the world. And the other point, the last point, what does this mean? What do we learn? We learn that there are hundreds, thousands and thousands, and I would say hundreds of thousands of talents, millions of stories in Gaza. The talents, the young people here who sadly remain unemployed. There is like 50% of unemployment in Gaza because of siege, because of the occupation. And when we talk about the siege, we don't talk just about 15 years ago. When the occupation started, the siege on Gaza started. People can't travel. Many people can't travel for many, sometimes they would lose chances to get education, or at least just go out and have fun and make new friends. So these talents can find hope and find purpose. They are evidence that Palestine, well, of course, we don't have to have this to deserve our freedom and our rights. We have to have our rights because every human being has to be free and has to be treated dignity. So all Palestinians equal, and this is something I usually talk about. We need to have as many projects as possible in Gaza. Projects to give people skills, to train people to write, to be writers, to write stories, to write poetry. The poems in Mosab, for example, you read them and it's like, oh my God, these are like really poetry written by well-established poets. People would like, can this come out of Gaza? Yes, so many things, and this applies to every aspect: footballers, photographers, writers, teachers, anything, any talent. There are hundreds of thousands of these talents we need to nurture and to take care of, not only because they give Gazans purpose and hope, but because they educate the world about Gaza.
Thank you so much, Refaat, for this. And and as you said, I mean, I fully agree with the point about why Palestinians in Gaza deserve to be free. We don't have to have PhDs in creative writing or in or to be extraordinary superhumans in order for us to deserve to live in dignity, to be able to travel, to be able to get medical treatment, to be able to visit our families. I mean, I personally haven't had the chance to see my family for almost 10 years now because of how difficult it is to travel and to move and to plan a trip to Gaza from a place like the US. uh, and and again, you know, at the end of the day, Palestinians in Gaza continue to show that they love life and they value life and they value their potential. And as someone who, you know, as someone who has siblings in Gaza, who has friends in Gaza, who received his education in Gaza and who grew up there, as you said, the potential is really like promising and impressive. And it's a shame. It's a shame that the Gaza is treated as a place that that should be silenced all the time. It is, I think, I mean, if I were to describe Israel's approach towards Gaza, it is, you know, it is violent, and it is, you know, rooted in these repeated seasons of bombardment. But also Israel hopes and has been hoping since 1948 that Gaza disappears, not necessarily physically, but also, you know, for people there to be forgotten, that forgetfulness triumphs in Gaza, that nobody pays attention to the plight of Palestinians there that has been unfolding since 1948. The fact that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their towns, cities, and villages in historic Palestine to be pushed into what became the Gaza Strip, a small strip of land where they, you know, the majority of them would continue to live as refugees since 1948, for, you know, in 8 refugee camps, with some of them have the highest population density in the world, just because Israel wants to continue to maintain its Jewish demographic majority. And of course, you know, this the very existence of the Gaza Strip, and, you know, we all talk about this context, right? This historical context, which is incredibly relevant all the time to consider when thinking about Gaza. I'm looking at some of the questions from our audiences, and we will answer some of them. But I would like to talk to Mosab a little bit about, you know, to go back to the question of culture, the question of writing, the question of art, you know, as means, as tools for resistance, for liberation, for defiance. And, you know, when I first, you know, talked to my colleagues about this book project, we thought about this book project as part of a campaign that the organization I work with, American Friends Service Committees, launched in 2015. The campaign is called Gaza Unlocked, and it aims, the aim of the campaign is to raise awareness and push for policy shifts on Gaza. And we realized that, we tried our best as part of the campaign to, bring Palestinians from Gaza to the United States on speaking tours, welcome people. We hosted Refaat, we hosted Ahmed Abu Toha, and, we have a speaking tour about this book coming up soon, which I will talk about. I'll share more details about it in the end of this program today. But I want to talk to Mosab about, the act of breaking the blockade intellectually, culturally, through writing and art. You mentioned some examples in your book about, of initiatives, projects in Gaza that struggle to break the siege, to challenge the blockade through intellectual production, through knowledge production, through the creation of art. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience being part of these initiatives and projects? What it's been like for you as a writer, as an author, as a poet, to challenge all these restrictions? You're here today in the United States, sharing your, talking about your work, talking about your your achievements as a poet and as a writer. But can you tell us a little bit about the bigger picture in Gaza? What do poets, writers, authors, and and artists do? How do they challenge these restrictions on a daily basis? And are there initiatives and projects that you would like to highlight today? And ones, of course, that you highlighted in your chapter.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Just before I go and address your question, I want to talk about the book exhibit that took place in Ramallah of this year. So in May 2018, about 60 writers in Gaza participated in the Ramallah book exhibit in the West Bank. The writers themselves didn't participate, just their books. The PA Ministry of Culture applied for permits for the writers, but the Israeli authorities refused to grant them. They even rejected to grant permits to the participating publishers. The former Minister of Culture, Jehad Abusalim, stated. Fortunately, the books did not need permits to participate in the exhibit. So that was in 2018, and I wrote that in my chapter. Unfortunately, this happened again, and this time it happened to one of my writer friends in Gaza. His name is Saeed Al-Kahlout. So he's a writer. He has 3 books. So he was on the list of people participating in this year's book exhibit. So he got the permit, luckily. But when he went when he passed through the Israeli checkpoint in Erez, just a few kilometers away from Gaza, one Israeli soldier, maybe it was the driver, I'm not sure. So he saw the permit paper that he had, and he said, "Oh, you are from Gaza. Are you still alive?" So Saeed responded by saying, "We do not die. We are the salt of this earth." So that Israeli guy, I'm not sure if it's a police officer or a soldier or a driver, he got angry and he said, "Okay, then go back to Gaza." And he sent him back, and Saeed didn't make it to Ramallah that time. So even though Palestinians are under the threat of death in Gaza, they are also silenced. They are not given the freedom to speak their thoughts and their minds. They cannot, Gazans cannot give up on their land, not only their land, but also thinking about it. So this is one thing. I want to talk about the Edward Said Public Library that I established in Gaza, just very, very briefly. So I talked about the bombardment of the Islamic University of Gaza in 2014, and I was able to rescue a book and give it to the security guard at the university. So that book was the seed, one of the seeds of many more books to come to Gaza, and which were the founding books. Let me use this term: the founding books of the Edward Said Public Library, which in Gaza has now 2 branches. I'm really thankful to the supporters of the Edward Said Public Libraries and the endorsers, especially Noam Chomsky, the great public intellectual, and also poet Katha Pollitt from New York, and also the Edward Said family, who supported the library by sending Edward's books. And on the first page, there was a stamped gift from the Said family. And to highlight another thing is that most of the initiatives in Gaza are being headed by individuals like me. So there is a fatal lack of public libraries in Gaza, cultural centers, etc. There is no Ministry of Culture. There is nothing official that's trying to change this. So it's only individuals who are just caring about the future of the generation, the young generation. So if it's not us, then who? So I had to move. I had to take initiative, and the same thing is with what Refat is doing. He is doing it because he believes in it. He's teaching young writers to write. He's encouraging them to find their own voices, and when they find their own voices, they would just teach others to find their own voice. So it's a chain of change bringers. I would use this. So it's us. It's every one of us. Every one of us can be a ministry. So Refat is a minister of education and culture. I could be one. Jehad, you are one, of course. Everyone who is trying to change by teaching, by spreading the word about what's happening. Not, I mean, when I write poetry, when I write, and so what Rifat wrote in this book and what he wrote previously, he's not only talking about himself. I'm not only talking about myself as Musab. I'm talking about others who do not have the means to write. Maybe because they do not have the language to express it. Maybe they do not have the connection to publish this piece. So we are not, although we are individuals who are taking the lead, but we are talking not only about ourselves. We are talking about those who, not only because they do not have the power of language, like talented writers, but because there are many people who were buried under the rubble of their own houses. So they did not have the chance to tell us what happened. So it's our role as writers to create their story, to share their story, because everything would be lesser than death. So if they died, then I want to imagine how they died, even if I exaggerate some things, because there is nothing more horrible than death. And in the chapter, I talk about different initiatives, about the TEDx Shuja'iyya. There was also another TEDx. It was in Al-Rimal, which is another neighborhood in Gaza. There are people who are taking initiatives in forming book clubs in libraries, in cultural centers. And, you know, many writers in Gaza are just publishing their work in bookstores or in publishing houses, and they pay their own money. So there is no bookstore or there is no publisher in Gaza that would help writers publish and support their work. A Gazan needs to pay for the book that he's publishing. And there is no Ministry of Culture that is, I mean, there is some support, but that's not enough. I mean, people in Gaza need an official body to support them. At least, I mean, translating their work. I cannot think of a book from Gaza that's been translated into English. Maybe some poems here and there, some short stories, but there is no book that's been translated into English, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as someone who I'm in academia, in addition, you know, to this work that I do, and one of the things that struck me since I came to the US, and I have been, you know, part of academic spaces, Middle Eastern studies, you know, departments. You know, meeting and working with and getting to know scholars and academics who work on the region. One of the things that struck me is how limited the connections are between academic departments in the West, especially in the United States, and cultural institutions and universities and cultural institutions in Gaza. And I think this is something that you know, scholars and activists and authors and poets and artists and people who are active in the cultural scene in the West in general and in the United States in particular, they need to you know, they need to consider and start working on, because you know, nobody should normalize Israel's blockade. And while we cannot, or we haven't been able to fully you know, push for a complete lift of the blockade, that doesn't justify inaction when it comes to these areas where the blockade can be challenged, you know, intellectually, can be challenged through cultural exchanges, even if they were virtual, even if they were happening from afar, and struggle to, you know, connect with Palestinian artists and writers and activists, especially, you know, in the cultural world in Gaza and beyond. And Gaza is a very rich place. Every once in a while, some grand archaeological discovery is made there, and I think, you know, the field of archaeology, the field of historical excavations, and all of these areas require incredible attention from the outside world. These bonds, these relationships need to be built and maintained. And here we are. I think this book project does that. It creates this it creates this message from Gaza, from writers in Gaza who are writing about different issues, different aspects of the Palestinian experience in Gaza. Asma writes about agriculture. Durgham writes about social issues. Mosab writes about culture. Refaat writes about storytelling and narrative building, and how do we talk about this massive inheritance that is passed from one generation to another of pain and suffering. Basman, Isra, all of these people, all of these contributors, they write about different issues, different topics, different themes, but the common thread in the book is that Gaza cannot be ignored anymore, and Gaza needs to be centered within the movement for Palestinian rights. When talking about what needs to be done in Palestine, the Palestinian struggle, visions for liberation, visions for equality, visions for ending the occupation and apartheid, Gaza cannot be ignored, and voices there need to be part of these conversations. But also, we're talking today through a platform of an American progressive publisher that has a large audience in the American left, in progressive movements and spaces. And it is also very important, for us to build these connections beyond the world of Palestinian advocacy and politics. As Refaat said, our struggle overlaps and intersects with many other struggles around the world, and that's what we're trying to do by putting this book out there and by putting these stories out there. Knowledge entails responsibility, and I think this is what this book tries to do. I think the time has come to answer some of the questions from our audience. I have a few questions, and Refaat and Musab, please feel free to address them. So we have a question from Natalie, basically asking, can we discuss how and why Gaza has become more restricted in recent years? And I know this is, we provide context for the bigger history of how Gaza ended up in this situation, but any answers from you to this question would be really appreciated, especially because you live there, your experience is on the ground, and you're familiar with the situation. Refaat, you're still muted. Sorry.
Gaza has long been restricted and besieged for decades, but people have started paying attention recently. Every aspect of Palestine, occupied Palestine, is under siege. Israeli jeeps in the West Bank can just roll into any neighborhood close, like they did with the human rights organizations in the West. People are paying attention more, thanks to there is also a blockade in Western mainstream media, television, but thanks to social media, people have started paying attention. I remember people even early in the 90s with family members saying that they were sent back. Israel did not allow them to travel through Egypt or to go to the West Bank or go to Jordan. So the punishments were always there. The restrictions were always there because occupation brings the siege. The siege was tightened even more after Hamas won the election in 2006. But the news of this news was tightened even before, during the second Intifada, because, and probably Gaza is being punished more than any place because of what Gaza stands for, because of what Gaza means. Gaza is almost literally a thorn in Israel's throat, and in the throat of all those occupying powers around the world and those imperialists and colonialists. Gaza is a symbol. Gaza is a reality, a harsh reality. People who are coerced, oppressed, downtrodden, and yet fighting back, yet struggling to regain, to restore their rights. And the more we fight back, the more Israel punishes us. And because Israel hopes that we would give up. And Israel is doing this, by the way, to areas in the West Bank, in Nablus. Jenin, look at what Israel is doing. In 2000, I think about more than around 150 people were killed, have been killed so far in 2001. 100 of them were killed in West Bank and a part of Jerusalem. 50 were killed in 3 days in Gaza, including more than 2. So there are a lot more people being killed currently in the West Bank than in Gaza, because Israel doesn't want any Palestinian to try even to think of fighting back. So Gaza is being punished more. Gaza is being the focus of social media attention, and people are talking about Gaza all over the internet. But mainly Israel wants to tell everybody that if you fight back like Gaza, we'll punish you, restrict even the medicine. For some time, Israel was counting the calories entering Gaza, making sure that everybody gets this amount of calories. This is extreme. This only happens in dystopian movies, but Israel did this to Gaza.
You're muted, Jehad.
Thanks, Mosab. We'll take 2 more questions because we have 5 to.
If I may, if I just may address the question just very quickly. I mean, just as Refat said, I mean, Gaza has been restricted for so long. I mean, as long as there's occupation, there is restrictions. But more restrictions have been imposed after 2007, after a blockade was imposed by Israel, by the world, and especially because there is still a heightening political dispute between the 2 main parties, Hamas and Fatah. So there are punishments that are directed against the Gazan population. There is discrimination against the Palestinian Authority's employees who are in Gaza. So, for example, one of my relatives is a PA employee, and he's thinking about going to the West Bank to change his ID location so that he can get full salary rather than getting 60 or 70% of his salary because he is based in Gaza. So there are more to think about when it comes to restrictions in Gaza. It's the occupation, it's the siege, it's the political rift, the nasty political rift, which adds more and more salt to injury.
Thank you, Mosab. There is another question. Basically says, hearing these stories from Gaza is incredibly moving, in part because of how little the voices of those in Gaza appear in American media. Besides sharing the book, what can we do here in the States to make sure that more people hear about what's happening? The hope is that in knowing, more people will be moved to solidarity and action.
I think this is a very significant question. There are thousands of Palestinians all over social media. Many Palestinians who write for the Electronic Intifada, Mundo Rights, Middle East Eye, Middle East Al Jazeera, and other websites. These voices, these articles, these pieces need to be shared. If you are in a community where there are BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions chapters, for example, if you are at university, reach out to those people, listen to their arguments, participate in their activities. If you attend political gatherings, for example, ask people running for office questions about Palestine, what should be done to end the occupation, to end the apartheid, or at least to ease the suffering of Palestinians. Talk to your friends, to your family members in gatherings, and share these stories with them. This is significant. The story needs to be told and retold. And at the same time, the story needs to create activism, to mobilize people, create pressure And I think thanks to what so many people have been doing, Palestine is now, the story of Palestine is being told and retold, despite the fact that Israel does a lot of pressure, despite the racism and the bigotry we find in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, on TV and CNN, for example. There are people who, in the American media, who are sometimes more extreme than Israeli military leaders and officials, or some of them copy-paste Israeli propaganda. So we need to tell the story, retell the story, and share it with people around us, and put pressure on officials around us.
I just like what Refaat says. This is one of Refaat's mottos, which is Palestine is a story away. And when I signed the book for Refaat while I was in Gaza, I wrote to him, Palestine is a poem away. And what I'm saying to the asker of this question is that Palestine is a voice away. So we need your voice. We need you to speak out and talk to others about this issue. Invite speakers, invite writers to talk to your community. Be engaged. I mean, by writing, by speaking, by taking to the street if there is, God forbid, any aggression against Gaza or the West Bank or anywhere in the world. So your voice matters, just like the words we are writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mosab. We have 5 more minutes before I conclude this event, and I would like for our audience to stick till the end, because I'll be sharing details about the book tour, which will start in a couple of weeks. But there is another question about rage, a question from Philomena, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, who says that they spent only 2 weeks in the West Bank with a group of students and was filled with rage. How do you, those who are there, manage that rage? Maybe by writing. How do we manage the rage?
That's a very important. At the same time, I think it's a very painful question. I think Palestinian as a father, I don't usually share these ideas with my wife or family members. There's usually more regret sometimes than rage. The regret that one time I decided to get married and have kids, to bring kids to this world, to this unfair world, to this unjust world, to the world where Israel can just butcher and massacre and destroy Palestinians at will, large, and nobody can do anything. Sometimes this rage comes in the form of pain, of helplessness. This kind of rage is with us 24/7, even as we sleep. If you listen carefully, probably you'll hear the sound, the buzzing sound of the drone. Israel wants to remind us that it can control, it does control every tiny little aspect of our lives. And it is very infuriating in many ways. Let us live. Sometimes I'm asked this question, what is the solution? And I say, at least this is Israel clutching, like suffocating us. Say, but first, like stop suffocating us. Let us breathe. Let us get some oxygen, some freedom. Let us regain our ability to speak, to voice our concerns and hopes and concerns and everything. And then we can talk about this. And yes, we can release this by so many ways, by tweeting angrily. And you know what? What is even more outrageous is that sometimes when we tweet about this rage, when we tweet about this anger, even in 2021, we would be tweeting like almost. I'm living currently in the city, the heart of Gaza City, and sometimes even in the safe place in Gaza, you get debris and shrapnel from bombs hitting the walls of your flat where you live. like expecting death at any moment. And when you would be tweeting angrily, shouting, people would be mocking you. Israelis, Zionists, Israeli trolls, and pro-Israelis would be making fun of you and even sending you threats and death threats and making light of your pain and suffering. So even when we are angry, we're not allowed to voice this kind of anger. But like you said, yeah, writing, tweeting, talking, telling stories, these are significant ways to tell the people about our pain and anger.
Thank you, Refat. And I think, Mosab, I would like for you to answer this question by reading your poem, A Rose Shoulders Up, which is included in the book. Mosab contributed with more than one poem to this anthology, and I think it's the proper conclusion for today's event. And after that, I will talk about the tour and other logistical things. So, Mosab, please go ahead. You're muted, Mosab. Mosab.
Okay, thank you, Jihad. So the title of the poem is A Rose Shoulders Up. It's a small poem, 4 lines. Don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of the house. This is how we survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mosab. In the book, there are photos that are matched with all of the chapters and the poems, and I know that we chose a photo that resembles the poppy rose, which has a symbolic value in Palestinian thought. Thank you so much, Refat Alareer and Mosab Abu Toha, for sharing your time and for sharing your reflections and writing with us today. And thank you to those who attended today's event for showing up, for asking questions. I know we haven't been able to answer all of the questions, but I hope you will find some answers in the book and you will join us in future events. And if you are in one of the cities in which the book tour will take place, we welcome you again to hear from 2 of the authors. Please make sure to check out AFSC's Gaza campaign, www.gazaunlocked.org, and our anthology page, gazaunlocked.org/anthology, for information about the book and future events. AFSC is organizing a speaking tour featuring 2 of the authors published in Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire, in October 2022. AFSC will also be planning a series of online events with authors in 2022 and 2023. For more information and ways to connect with us, please email us at gazaunlocked@afsc.org. With that, I would like to conclude today's event. Thank you so much for participating, Refat and Mosab. Thank you again, and please, join us in future events, in person or virtually. And until then, please do not forget Gaza. Please do not forget Palestinians in Gaza. Please keep us in your minds, hearts, and action. Thank you so much, and appreciate you all coming today.